a video camera that we show you, but we can show you that we're here and everything is okay. We're all alive right now. Here's like, so there's me and there's everybody else. So we're here. Well, they can't, well, they can see me right now, but and now we're gonna share the video. Oh, wait a second. Gotta do one thing. Give me one sec. All right, now we're good. And now, like I said, it's a little bit off, but we'll make it work. And yeah, we get good income from the church renting from us. So I don't want to make it too hard on them, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure out what happened one way or the other. But probably somebody messed with some control, some switch. And yeah, so it's good to see everybody today. And last week we read about Jeremiah buying this field in Anatot, which is his family's inheritance. His family inheritance, and he did it at a time when no one would have thought it was a good time to buy property, and he did. So now, where we are today, Gail, were you going to say something? Oh, so where we are today is that oh, I hear Jonah. I hear Jonah. What? Yeah, I know.
Hello, ladies.
So Doreen saying hi. So yeah, the last thing we read about is, again, Jeremiah, even though he's very he's making sure everyone knows that there's destruction happening, he hasn't given up on the future, right? And so buying this field, as we read about, is this part that we just read about here. And well, it's right back up here. When he says to him, buy my land in Anatot, as we said, it is a very hopeful, and it's a very powerful thing he does. And if you think about it, it's crazy because he's actually in prison when it happens. And that's where we are in this scene here. So just to remind you, Jeremiah has been put in prison because he's prophesying against the king and against the leadership in Judah, and telling them that they need to surrender and they need to give up and they need to stop fighting the Babylonians. And he is a threat to them. So what we're going to read today is about the siege as it's happening, and the fact that even though Jeremiah is upsetting the king still, and other people obviously still believe in Jeremiah. So let's look. Let's take a look at chapter 33 is where we're reading from. So Rosemary, if you want to take over for us.
The word of God came to Jeremiah a second time while he was still confined in the prison compound, as follows. Thus said God, who is planning it, God, who is shaping it to bring it about, whose name is God. Call to me and I will answer you, and I will tell you wondrous things, secrets you have not known. For thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, concerning the houses of this city and the palaces of the kings of Judah that were torn down for defense against the siege mounds and against the sword, and were filled by those who went to fight the Chaldeans, with the corpses of those whom I struck down in my anger and rage, hiding my face from this city because of all their wickedness. I am going to bring her relief and healing. I will heal them and reveal to them abundance of true favor.
Now,
Honestly,
that ends on a nice.
I don't like this passage
Why? Why?
because it sounds like an abusive husband.
Correct.
I was mad at you, but I'm
bit.
going to love you.
A little bit. So it is seriously, if nothing passive aggressive or like Rosemary described, a little bit like I hit you, but I do it because I love you and I just need you to listen to me, that kind of thing. Now, there definitely is that sense. But because what happens here is crazy in the sense that it actually says you don't have homes because you tore down the homes. Hey guys, just started. You tore down your homes because you're under siege, and your homes were torn down. We put them up as filler against the walls as siege mounds, and the buildings are already filled with bodies. So I titled this class Siege and Destruction because this is literally in the midst of the siege and destruction of Jerusalem. These people are literally being told it's going to be okay, but they're being told it's going to be okay but through Jeremiah, but God is telling them we're going to be okay as they're literally being killed. So again, Rosemary's description of this being like an abusive husband telling the wife it's going to be okay as they're being beaten is a little accurate. I think it's a little right on, unfortunately. But I guess in this case, and again, why we would say maybe it doesn't ring true is because in Jeremiah's mind and from the mind of the people who kept this, the people broke the covenant. The people deserved it. So the beating that they're getting, that's the problem. That's the problem. Yeah. So the Chaldeans are the Babylonians. It might even say no, it doesn't say. It just says Chaldeans are, but the Kasdim are the Babylonians. Yeah. So it's deserved in their minds. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than they believed that they deserved it, or we believed, we still do, I guess. So yeah, it ends on a hopeful note, right? I mean, that little bit. But as you can see, this is not typical prophecy because, well, you see, it's not written out exactly, again, like doublets, but and some of it is doublet style, but it is really in the midst of a description of events as they're happening, which is a little different than it will happen, in the future. What's going to happen in the future is the restoration, but right now is the destruction, the purge, if you will. Actually, that's exactly what the translation is here, purge. So, so let's look. I will restore.
And I will restore the fortunes of Judah and Israel, and I will rebuild them as of old. And I will purge them of all the sins that they committed against me, and I will pardon all the sins that they committed against me, by which they rebelled against me. And she shall gain through me renown, joy, fame, and glory above all the nations on earth. When they hear of all the good fortune I provide for them, they will thrill and quiver because of all the good fortune and all the prosperity that I provide for her.
Yeah. The translation of thrill and quiver, which you read beautifully, can be translated in a different way. I get why they translated it that way, but I guarantee you that's not the way that all the translations are. What's the King James say, Mary?
That's what I have.
Yes. So thrill and quiver, they're definitely trying to go with it's a good feeling, right? But that's not what the Hebrew means. The word pachad really means fear. It's almost always used in the sense of fear. So they definitely felt, the translators here, that they went with if I say the word thrill and quiver, that's usually not words associated with fear and trembling. Correct. Yeah. So they went with, and that's why when I said Rosemary read it really well, that's what the translators here wanted you to feel. And what I think is interesting that Rosemary already laid out, I didn't have to, is the anthropomorphization of Jerusalem and the Jews being women. Now, it has a totally different meaning if you translate it as fear and trembling. And the reason that they went with that is because the first part of it's good stuff, right? Sason, Tchila, Tiferet, it's all good stuff. Fame, glory, beauty, all this stuff. And again, the fact that it's women, it's a woman of feminine form is interesting. But that's not, obviously, we've seen it in Jeremiah and Isaiah that Israel and the people are compared to a woman. But what's interesting about this is that the Hebrew, and I think the real translation that should be more of fear and trembling, is actually an interesting one, because what it's saying is that when the good things happen, it's not like you're excited. It's not even sexual excitement or any kind of excitement, good excitement. You're still scared. I'm still scared. So why? Because whenever something good happens to somebody after they've been beaten or abused, as much as they're happy, they're also scared that it's going to get taken away again. And I think that that's actually more of a true statement, that it's fear and trembling rather than the joy and the thrill, because is this really happening? That's the feeling that he's describing. It isn't just a sense of joy, thrill, but a sense of I'm afraid, I don't want to come out yet. I'm still scared. And so I think that the Hebrew is actually a little bit more. That's why the translation, I guess it seems strange. How do they translate good fortune? John, what's your translation? They will thrill and quiver because of all the
Fear and trembling.
Yeah, and then what does it say? For all the
goodness and for all the prosperity that I.
Yeah, so they use the same word, prosperity. What does yours say, though, Mary? It says prosperity. That's not what the word is. You can see the word right there. Everyone can read this word. Kol tov is all goodness, and then what's this word right here? It says shalom.
Oh.
It doesn't say prosperity. It says shalom. I mean, I get it. They're saying it's goodness and success, but it says shalom, which is obviously peace. You could say fullness, even completeness, or a sense of harmony, I guess, but it's not, but this seems to imply that it's financial, or that it's like a bill, but it's really goodness. The literal translation is goodness and peace, or good things and peace, tov and shalom. So I understand why they say thrill and quiver for all the good fortune and prosperity, but it's really a sense of, I could translate it as the fear and trembling that I have now that things are at peace. I'm still not quite okay. I'm still have fear and trembling because I'm excited about it. I can come out, but can I really come out? I mean, is it really safe for me to put my head out now? And that's what I think the feeling is. I think it's not like, oh, it's automatically I'm happy again. So here's the line that, getting to the lines that are kind of very famous. Let's keep going.
Thus said God, again there shall be heard in this place, which you say is ruined, without humans or animals, in the towns of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem that are desolate, without humans, without inhabitants, without animals. The sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, the voice of those who cry, give thanks to God of hosts, for God, whose steadfast love is eternal, is good, as they bring thanksgiving offerings to the house of God. For I will restore the fortunes of the land as of old, said God.
So that's the famous line, right? So I'm going to, you say this area is desolate, will be desolate, but you know what? The sounds will come back. And these are the sounds that he described earlier, way earlier, about 20 chapters ago, 15 chapters ago. He used the same phrase. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. We say that at every wedding. It's part of the Shabbat brachas. It's the last seven, it's the last bracha, right? Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. So we sing that at weddings and people do horas to it. They dance around. These words from Jeremiah, the most desolate, negative prophet, has a line that we end up singing because like it's become the hallmark of joy, right? The happiest sounds that we can have is the sounds of a bridegroom and bride. That's considered to be the most joyous sound you could have. So this is why we do it at a wedding. And we talk about Jerusalem at the wedding too. We say we actually say the words in the courtyards of Jerusalem. So this is an interesting phrase. Again, it's a very famous phrase from Jeremiah. And it also carries with it this interesting phrase that you've heard before, Ki le'olam chazdo. God's love is eternal. Ki le'olam chazdo. It's all throughout the Psalms, right? Ki le'olam chazdo. All of Psalm 136, Ki le'olam chazdo is the refrain. So the Psalms, people are singing the Psalms again. So when he says, give thanks to God, Ki le'olam chazdo, right? Hodu here it's not Hodu Ladonai, it's Hodu Adonai Tzvaot. Give thanks to the Lord of hosts. Ki le'olam chazdo, right? So that's basically saying people are going to sing Psalms again. It's not just, oh, they're going to say these words. Everyone knows that's the Psalms. That's what they're saying. They're saying they're singing Psalms. So, and again, this is the return of the people to the land, and things are going to be okay. So this is all very positive in the midst of destruction. So what's interesting about this is here we get to Jeremiah where the destruction's actually happening. That's why I said the first 25 chapters of Jeremiah is very negative. The destruction is going to happen. It's unavoidable, etc. And then as the destruction is happening, Jeremiah's tone changes. It's not like it's not going to report that the destruction's happening. The destruction is happening, and he says that. It's not like he doesn't hold back in saying what's there. A ruined place, a place filled with corpses, a place of death, a place of destruction. You're going to see it over and over again. But he's also in the midst of that now comforting people. So it's a very interesting thing that Jeremiah does in the last half of the book, which he didn't do in the first half, which is actually now he's giving people hope. So, so continuing.
Thus said God of hosts, in this ruined place, without humans or animals, and in all its towns, there shall again be a pasture for shepherds where they can rest their flocks. In the towns of the hill country, in the towns of the Shephelah, and in the towns of the Negev, in the land of Benjamin, and in the environs of Jerusalem, and in the towns of Judah, sheep shall pass again under the hands of one who counts them, said God. See, days are coming, declares God, when I will fulfill the promise that I made concerning the house of Israel and the house of Judah.
Yeah, so that's a really good thing, right? I'm going to bring everybody back, and I'll fulfill the prophecies and the promises that I've made. And you can see the same phrase that he uses over and over again in the towns of the hill country. So right in the heights of in the hill country, the Judean mountains, in the Shephelah, which is the valley that goes out towards the coast, in the Negev, in the south, right, in the towards the desert, in the land of Benjamin, the vineyards of Jerusalem. He's describing the heartland of Israel. He's describing, the areas that the Judeans lived in, or that the people that are not along the coast, not in not in other areas. Doesn't even really say in the Galilee, by the way. This is really talking about where the people were living during his time. So let's read the next line.
In those days and that time, I will raise up a true branch of David's line, and he shall do what is just and right in the land. And in those days, Judah shall be delivered, and Jerusalem shall dwell secure. And this is what it shall be called: God is our vindicator. For thus said God, there shall never be an end to those of David's line who sit upon the throne of the house of Israel.
Yeah, which is interesting because, again, here he's not even calling it the house of Judah. He's not calling it the kingdom of Judah. He's calling it, he uses Judah too, but he also says that this is going to be for the whole house of Israel. So these lines, again, Tzemach David, a true branch of David. We use that word in some of our prayers, Tzemach David, which means a branch. That seems to imply, by the way, that only one part of David's family is going to make it, right? There's only one. It's not like all of them are going to make it. It's only one branch that's good. Look at the note here. It's maybe there'll be a new city called Tzidkenu, Tzedek Adonai. And of course, then it says there'll never be an end to David's line. Well, what does that mean? Because Israel is restored back, but there is no more Davidic king after. There is no king. David's line, there's no king of David anymore. The next Jewish king will be a Maccabee who's from the priests. He's a Cohen. He's not a Davidic king. That doesn't happen. Though people never stop thinking it's going to happen. We still say David Melech Yisrael, Chai Chai V'Kayam. And we still sing that. We sing that. Christians believe that Jesus was a descendant of David because they believe that if the Davidic line doesn't end through Jesus, then this prophecy gets fulfilled. This is a super important line for Jews and for Christians. Tzemach David. Tzemach David. People still call themselves the branch of David. The people who encamped and were eventually, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Sad chapter in our American history we saw unfold on TV. They call themselves branch Davidians. That's what that means. They saw themselves as a branch of David. They saw David Koresh as a branch of David. So this doesn't go away. The branch of David is not out of our minds. So, who is that, inheritor of David's, of David's line, we're still looking for them. Could that still happen? Because when Jeremiah says there's no end to David's line, people take that literally. They take that seriously. They say, well, but it never happened. When Israel was reestablished in the land, there was no Davidic line. There was no kingdom anymore. So I don't know what to tell you other than we figured out a way to live in the land without a king, but it didn't mean that people weren't thinking about it or hoping for it. You're his descendant. They're all descendants of David. Every one of us. Every one of us has Davidic DNA. I mean, I'm not just mean like every one of us. There's probably millions of Christians who have Davidic DNA in them. Look, this is the whole, Da Vinci Code thing, that
Right.
they kept.
I wondered when you were going to bring that up.
I was waiting for you to bring it up. Anyways, no, but that's this idea that, people still have a connection to. Look, I was in the Metropolitan Museum a month ago, whatever, not even a month ago. I was there. Weird, but I was there in New York. Bless you. And they have a scroll from Middle Ages from England, which shows the connection to the kings of England, to the Davidic line. I mean, people, they're obsessed with it, and they believe that when thus says God, it doesn't say Jeremiah said it, it says Ko Amar Adonai. God said there will never be an end to David's line. So yeah, I mean, that's why we still sing David Melech Yisrael, Chai Chai Vekayam. I mean, it's, we don't think about it when we're singing it or dancing in a hora, but that's what it means. David, the king of Israel, Chai Vekayam, he lives and will be reestablished.
I suggest you do throw a little Torah study in when we have these celebrations. It'll make more sense to people.
I guess,
instead of
but
just doing tradition.
But why do I don't need to rain on anyone's parade, because really, I mean, John, in reality, what we're saying is,
I'm here.
I know, but
But
my job is not to blow up people. I'm not here to tell you Santa doesn't exist. But what I'm telling, what I am telling you is that, what does it represent? Like, how do you recontextualize it? So when we say it today, or what I hear when I hear it, I probably didn't think about it. Who knows? I don't know. Did I ever hope that if I ever in my life hoped that the Davidic line would be reestablished? Not really. I don't like the idea. I don't like kings. I don't like kings in England, let alone kings in America, or kings in Israel, or kings anywhere. I hate it. I don't like that stuff. I mean, I do. Actually, let me say that. I love the history. I mean, I get sucked into the, I started reading about somebody the other day, and I'm like, how did I get sucked into this? But I don't like it. I mean, I don't like the fact that people were elevated because of, I mean, I don't like it.
But based on our reading, right?
Yeah.
Assuming this is accurate, they didn't have the ability for democracy back then.
I know.
They didn't have
I know. You're right. This was the best that they could do. Look, but that's the argument. And then I don't know if you were here for Samuel, the book of Samuel, but that's what Samuel tells the people. He says, why do you want a king? God is your ruler. If you have a king, he's going to take your wives, he's going to take your property, he's going to take your sons and put him in the army. And so, Samuel tells them everything a king's going to do. And then they still argue for it. And they say, we need to have one of our own. So when I hear David Melech Yisrael, I think of Jews just want to have control of their destiny. I mean, a king represents sovereignty and self-governance to some extent, to be able to say what David represented for us. And to some extent, I think, again, not thinking in terms of democracy, it meant control over your own autonomy, being able to say, we have a Jewish king and that's what the people essentially said to Samuel. We want a king like everybody else, because by having a king, we can say that we have a centralized government. We have an authority. You have unity. We're united behind. And that's the argument for the queen. I mean, that was the argument that the Queen of England provided people, which was a sense of unity, a sense of tradition, a sense of rallying behind somebody that they respect. Okay, first of all, that implies that you respect the person that you're rallying behind, which, again, as we know, there have been those people have been few and far between in England, and they've generally been the ladies. But I don't know. I mean, like, I know what you're saying. Yeah, this is the best that they could do. You're right. It is. It's the best that they could do. But at the same time, when I read it, I don't think about it from those. I don't think about it from the stance of like, we want to have a king. Look, that's the knock on Netanyahu too, which is he's been in power too long. Like in Israel, they didn't assume that people would be able to be returned to power, for 20 plus years, other than the fact that the first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, kept coming back too. But it's also like, that's like Winston Churchill. And, we have 10 years maximum you can do as president for that reason. I mean, George Washington didn't want to be king. He turned it down. So I think we have a different, which is what John says. We have a different understanding of what democracy is today. It would have been impossible for them to grasp that. And, but this didn't happen. So Jeremiah I don't want to say he's wrong, but there wasn't even a restoration of David's line. There was not a king in Jerusalem that came back. When the Jews came back, there was no king. I'm not saying there was like a little king, or there was no king. There was not even an attempt.
It's odd. You would think that someone would, that the pretenders would come out of the woodwork like Anastasia.
Correct. And what happened, Rosemary, was that the people who actually traced their ancestry through David were still living in Babylonia. I mean, the exilarchs, the people who ruled, in Babylon.
They didn't want to leave Babylon.
They traced their ancestry back to David, but they didn't do it in the land of Israel. The people, even the people who eventually became king, like the Maccabees, didn't say, hey, we're related to King David. They didn't even try. So it's interesting that's what really happened. This wasn't what happened. And there weren't pretenders. And I think to some extent in the back of our minds as Jews, it's difficult for me to say this because there's a complete absence of this. There's no text that says this, but I honestly think people said to themselves, we don't need to have another Jewish king because we don't need to have the same problems that everybody else has. And when the Maccabees came, it just proved it. It literally proved it, it took 5 generations, but they literally said, it's no better. We can't do a better job with a Jewish king. A Jewish king doesn't guarantee that good things will happen to us, or that it'll help us, or that there's any benefit for having a Jewish king over us. Which is one of the reasons why I think there were a lot of people that didn't care about the Romans as their leaders during the time of Jesus. I don't think that they cared. I don't think they cared about it 2,000 years ago, because they said, what's the alternative to have a Jewish king who's going to be as corrupt as everybody else? And that was King Herod, and he wasn't even really a Jewish king. So that's the interesting thing about us. We don't seem to want to have, in reality, we didn't really want to have a throne of Israel. And thankfully, the rest of the world caught up to us and saying, why do you need to have kings? So here's another interesting piece, though, which it's not just kings, it's
nor shall there ever be an end to the line of the Levitical priests before me, of those who present burnt offerings and turn the grain offering to smoke and perform sacrifices.
Well, that's true. There's never been an end to the Levitical priests, because we know who are priests. We still know who are Kohanim. They don't present burnt offerings and turn grain offerings to smoke, but they do. That part is 100% true. To some extent, again, there was a restoration of the priesthood after the Jews returned from Babylonia. So there were priests, but that came to an end. So let's say there's 4 things here that Jeremiah says. There's going to be no end to David's line, and they'll sit on the throne of Israel. There'll be no end to the priests, and they'll offer sacrifices. Of those things, well, there's really no end to David's line because there's still people there, but there was definitely an end to the throne. There was no end to the Levitical priests, but there definitely was an end to the offering up sacrifices. So maybe it's 50%.
We don't know the other tribes, but we do know, the priests, Aaron and Moses. I find that amazing.
Well, but we know who the Levites are. We know who the Levites are, and we know who the Kohanim are. Here, the reason that it doesn't translate, it's translated as Levitical priest, which is an interesting way of saying it, because they're actually, if it said Vela Kohanim, Vela Veha Leviim, that would mean and the Levites and the priests. Here it actually says the Levitical priest, because there's no other vav, there's no other and. I could argue, maybe originally there was a version of this that said it, because it would say there's no end to the Kohanim and there's no end to the Levites. They translated it as Levitical priest because it is missing a vav, so it is a legitimate. I don't know John. What does your translation say? Levitical priests. You're a Levite, right?
Yeah.
So there's no end. Still know who you are. He's right, but he's right on 50% of it. which is that they're still here.
The 18th,
Yeah.
neither shall the priest, neither shall the priest, the Levite, want a man before me to offer burnt offering.
Yeah. So they separated, which I think is the correct. Mary, what about yours? Yeah. So they separated it as two. So I think that's a better translation. Technically, there's no vav here, so that's why they translated it as Levitical priest, but it seems like a weird phrase. It's the Levites and the priests. That's the way it should be. And that's true. We know who the Levites are and we know who the priests are. Now, again, I mean, I would say that's one, but what they do, they don't really do anymore, but we still know who they are. So you can look at it as the cup is half full or the cup is half empty. You know, it's
Or you
still
could say 50% is not very impressive.
2,500 years later, Rosemary, that's pretty impressive. If it's 2 years later, then
Well, if he was just guessing, he could still get half of it right.
yeah, I would say the fact that well, Rosemary, I would say that first of all, the fact that there's any Jews alive 2,500 years later is already amazing.
Yeah, that's
Then the fact that there's actually people that we still know who are Levites and priests. So yeah, I mean, you could say he's 50% wrong or he's 50% right, but I also would say 2,500 years later, it's a pretty good promise. But it's a promise that's been fulfilled to some extent because people believed it and wanted it to believe it. And of course, there's people who believe that it will happen one day. It's still yet to happen, that it will happen. And if Jesus ever comes back, or if there's a new Messiah, first, whatever, then this will be, that'll happen. And then the prophecy will be 100% full. Well, we also have to have the priest too. We have to have a priest to get 100%, but he could be 100% right. It just hasn't happened yet. I mean, I'm dismissing that to some extent with laughter, but the reality is there's a lot of people who believe that. There's a lot of Jews who believe that, not a lot, but there's 5%, 3%, something. There's a lot of people in Israel who believe that that will still happen. So maybe it's 10%. I don't even know. But anyways, there are people who believe it's going to be 100% fulfilled. Other than the fact that you can make the argument, it says there'll never be an end. Well, depends on how you want to translate it. In the sense that it could always happen again, or it's never stopped, but it has stopped. You can't say it hasn't stopped, but the fact that it could start again, I guess, is open. If you say, because you could just say you could say there'll never be an opportunity for this not to happen. As long as there's Davidic line, and as long as there's priests and Kohanim, it could still happen. So when you say that it's liakaret, maybe, but who knows? But there's people in their minds who still want to have that happen. So that's the crazy. Well, say it's crazy, but look, one of the big protest signs you see now is King Bibi. The protest sign King Bibi is everywhere, and people say that's, they're not saying that happily.
How did he get elected?
God, the party has a majority. The Likud party with the other parties created a 64-seat majority. So it wasn't even close. It went up. So look, the argument is that if they really had a unity government without the fringe religious parties, the Likud and the blue and white party, or whatever it's going to be called now, if those center parties were unified, they'd have 70 votes, and it would be a center right party, and it would be more representative of the will of the people. But Netanyahu can't do that. Anyone else in the party, I said anybody else, 80% of the rest of the Likud could do it. He can't. He can't do that, because if he does it, he might go to jail. He actually is in a situation where he could go to jail if he doesn't get elected, if he doesn't stay in power. I don't want to say that sounds familiar, but it's not unfamiliar to us. Let's put it that way. The argument is not unfamiliar. So it is an issue, and it paralyzes Israel's politics. And in the meantime, the Israelis I talk to are just, they want things to go back to normal, and they don't want the discussion of, hey, should Israelis studying yeshiva have to go into the army? They don't want that to be a discussion anymore. Make it happen. And if they don't go in the army, they need to do national service. Enough already. Most Israelis, even those on the right, are sick and tired of it, because they're sick and tired of their kids having to go into the army and these other people not going. They don't like it. And I don't understand how that continues to happen other than this this freakish system of, having to pull together I don't think Netanyahu likes it, but he has no choice. He has to have they have to have those parties with him unless they had a national unity government, and they can't because of his personal situation. So that's the sad thing, really sad thing. But that's why no system we've come up with is perfect.
So they really don't have direct vote either.
No, but arguably they have more of a direct vote than we do, in the sense that if their party decides, if the Likud party decided they wanted to jettison Netanyahu, he'd be out. So they have more power than we do to some extent, I think. Who knows? I don't know. Look at, you tell me, you tell me in 6 months from now, you tell me by the end of the year, which is a better system, a system where, we can't have an election between. Yeah, I mean, you tell me. I mean, who knows? I still don't know what's going to happen by November, but let's see. We'll see a year before the election. You tell me which system is better, because I don't know that we have a better system. I really don't.
Well, not the way it's currently.
I know. So it's hard for me to mock their system when our system seems pretty dysfunctional right now. But I don't know. I don't know what the best is. Look, France is. Every parliamentary democracy is having a problem right now. Look, England had 3 prime ministers in a year. 3?
Yes,
3. Yeah. I don't know. That's not a good system either.
democracies are having.
Yeah. Well, that's what Churchill said. It's the worst government. What did he say? That's the worst. Rosemary, what's the
He said it was the worst system except for all the others.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Something
All
like
right.
that.
So here's Jeremiah's take on what's going on to some extent.
Thus said God, if you could break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that day and night should not come at their proper time, only then could my covenant with my servant David be broken, so that he would not have a descendant reigning upon his throne, or with my ministrants, the Levitical priests.
God has certainly changed his tune.
Well, yeah, wait. Here, read the next paragraph.
Like the host of heaven that cannot be counted, and the sand of the sea that cannot be measured, so will I multiply the offspring of my servant David and of the Levites who minister to me.
So that's his little prophecy right there, right? Thus says God, I can't break my covenant. It's like the sun and the moon. It's like the orders of the heavens. Doreen, I turned down the air for you. I can turn it back up. No, I'm turning it back up. Bro, it's too cold. But I thought you were hot, Doreen. Okay, well, I'm gonna raise it. Yeah, it's too cold. So I look at Doreen for climate stuff. Anyways, so yeah, so David, so David's line again, not broken, same kinds of ideas. Here it actually says the word covenant. It's my covenant. My covenant will not be broken. And so it's not only that there's a descendant on the throne, and there's a descendants who are priests, but that they will be numerous, right? They cannot be counted. Well, that kind of happened a little bit. So again, the fact that they're still there is kind of cool, but the fact that they are reigning on a throne, I don't know. I mean, here it seems to be, again, like it's going to happen, like it's not going to end, rather than it could happen again in the future. So what were you saying, Reverend Lynn, as far as he's changed his tune?
God explains very clearly why we do not have a king.
Yeah.
Now backing the king 100%.
Yeah. And I think, again, there's this understanding that what's the, like John was saying, what's the answer? I mean, there's no other, it's not like you have a solution. It's not like an alternative, right? Like we're going to give you there's a better answer here.
It seems to me it speaks against God being omnipotent.
Well, it also says that God can change his tune and say, I changed my mind. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, which is, again, if somebody's speaking on behalf of God and saying, well, this is what God's telling me, what, is this the best of making the best of this? Could they have said that? Because people would have said, what do you?
You're dropping out, Mark.
No, it's because I pressed it. So I don't know. Well, how would they have even said? How would God even have said, well, there'll be other systems of government that we can have in the future where you don't have to have a king. I mean, it took England till the 1600s before they said we don't have to have a king anymore, and they killed the king and put Parliament in charge. And then they ended up having a Cromwellian tyrant anyways. They just had an
They had an elected tyrant
yeah,
instead
they
of
had an
a
elected
born
tyrant.
one.
So yeah, I mean, what's the answer? What?
What Churchill said was democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
All the others. Yeah, that's it. It's much more eloquent. Who was the king that Cromwell killed? He killed James? Was it
No, Charles.
Charles? Yeah.
Charles
Charles.
first.
First, what? Second.
And
The
Charles
restoration,
II
the glorious restoration.
got restored.
Yes, the glorious restoration. That was Charles, right?
Yeah,
Second?
The Caroline Divine.
Yeah.
think.
That was in the 1600s, the late 1600s. So yeah, England had no king for a little bit. And but and there was definitely religious issues there too between Catholics and Protestants. That was a little bit of, it wasn't just king stuff, it was also religious stuff. But yeah, I mean, what's the alternative? So
People obviously need a leader.
yeah.
What kind of a leader and where do they come from?
Well, the interesting thing, and again, this gets to what would have happened if, like, how did Christianity read this? But Christianity read it, and at least they didn't probably invent it, was that the Messiah, at least by the time of the Romans, didn't have to be a king in the sense of ruling like a king, at least to some people. Yeah, at least to some people. But for other people, Jesus literally had to be a king. For other people, he didn't have to be a king. He didn't have to be a Jewish king. But if you look at the prophets, and this is part of the problem, is if you look at a prophet like Jeremiah or Isaiah, more Jeremiah, he's Isaiah too. How do you read this and not think that the guy has to be a king? I don't know that you can't. And again, some people have Jesus. I mean, you can look at paintings and, beautiful.
That's his title, King of Kings.
Yeah. I mean, you see it in some of the stuff, but it wasn't like the only way Jesus was depicted. And it definitely, a crucified Jesus is not the Jesus as a king, but there are the Jesus as king pictures that people had, and it didn't go away. It's not like it went away, but
As a matter of fact, there's the Christus Rex. It's Christ crucified on the cross with a crown.
yeah, trying to have a little bit of both. So I don't know. I mean, it's part of the challenge that I think people have always had, which is, are we going to say that the king is ruling on behalf of God, is God? All of those things are possibilities, but I don't know that during the Roman period, Jews were looking to have necessarily a Jewish king. I just really don't. I don't know that the Jews felt that. So whether Christians would have felt it or not, that's a fair question. But start with the question: Did the people who were walking around at the time want to have a Jewish king? I don't know that they did. But Jeremiah seems to say that they do, and think that they do, and think that they will, and think that they always will. So I'm just telling you, I'm not going to ruin the end of Jeremiah, but I will tell you that Jeremiah at least holds out the hope that that Davidic line is not going to go away, which is like, I just want to tell you, it's not what people think about with Jeremiah, because most of the people who read Jeremiah, quite frankly, there are not enough Jews who read Jeremiah. And what do we do with that anyways? What do we do with that image of the king kind of being the last word? I promise you, like what you're reading now is not like, it's not going to change. All right, here's again, this is Jeremiah's message, which is more hopeful now and is, well, all right, let's read it.
You see what this people said. The two families that God chose have now been rejected. Thus they despise my people and regard them as no longer a nation. Thus said God, as surely as I have established my covenant with day and night, the laws of heaven and earth, so I will never reject the offspring of Jacob and my servant David. I will never fail to take from his offspring rulers for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Indeed, I will restore their fortunes and take them back in love.
So, that can be read differently by different people, but when it says that the two families that God chose, it's talking about the house of Israel, the house of Jacob, of Judah. They're talking about the two kingdoms. You know, people are saying God's rejected them, but now Jeremiah is saying, no, God wants everyone to know I haven't rejected them. And like there again, like there's day and night, like there's a heavenly order, I have not rejected them. Now, I've heard Christians tell me this, as well, primarily evangelical Christians who've told me that it's impossible to reject Jews as having a covenant because the Bible says in Jeremiah that the covenant exists with the Jewish people as surely as there's a heaven and an earth. So Jews cannot be rejected. So again, it's nice that people quote this because, yeah, but it's, you know, it's important that people are reading this now and looking for proof texts to say why we don't reject Jews, why we say Jew, or more importantly, why we say God didn't reject the Jews. Because God says, I will not reject the Jews. I will not reject them. And and this phrase that we have a lot, which is ashuv, shuvah, shivti. This is all about teshuvah. This is all about return. And that's definitely what we think about at this time of year as we return to God during this time of return. So that's a really nice, that's a nice phrase. And again, like I said, I've had Christians literally tell me this. It says, you know, look, and I don't ask them, I don't say, what do you teach about, you know, succession theology? I don't talk about, you know, that Jews have been rejected and then replaced by Christianity. That's essentially the theology that some churches had, which was that Jews have been rejected and they've been replaced by the followers of Jesus. But this kind of goes against that possibility. So that's good. There's proof texts within the within the Bible that say that's not going to happen. So you know, it's good to know that there's places, and again, it comes from Jeremiah, that we oftentimes think is very negative, but that's a very nice and positive phrase. Now, more of what's happening as the siege is going on. Here we go. This is 34.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and all his army and all the kingdoms of the earth and all the peoples under his sway were waging war against Jerusalem and all its towns.
By the way, so you already know about the Babylonian destruction. We've read about it. We're in the midst of it. I want to point out again, this is the king, his army. And what it says here is the kingdoms of the earth and all the peoples under his sway are waging war against Jerusalem. So that tells us it wasn't just the Babylonians. It was all the other countries that are now allied with the Babylonians and that are part of the Babylonian Confederation, the Babylonian Empire. So it tells us right there, it's not just Babylonians. It's Edomites, it's Ammonites, it's Arameans, it's everybody that's now underneath this confederation. with the exception of the Egyptians and a few other countries that were probably in the Egyptian sway, like the Ethiopians, the Lydian, the people in that part of Africa, Nubians. Other than that, everybody on the other side between Babylonia and Israel, Judah is now part of the confederation. They're all part of this empire. So
Thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, go speak to King Zedekiah of Judah and say to him, thus said God, I am going to deliver this city into the hands of the king of Babylon, and he will destroy it by fire. And you will not escape from him. You will be captured and handed over to him. And you will see the king of Babylon face to face and speak to him in person, and you will be brought to Babylon.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think Zedekiah wants to hear that, but and by the way, the reason I told you that all the other countries are part of this, because that's going to play out in the next few chapters too, by the way. Just keep in mind that there's a reason why I told you that all the other nations are involved in this too. Anyway, so Zedekiah, about 586. This is 586, 586 BCE. This is as the war. How long after Noah? 2000. Yeah, I know you love Noah. It's about 2,000 years after Noah. Well, we don't really know, but it's 600 years after Moses. It's 400 years after King David. It's a long time ago, but if you think about it, it's already a lot of stuff has happened since then. Joshua, the judges, Samuel, King David, all of those things are well in the back. And this is about the time, 586 was not long before the Greek city-states are starting to emerge, but they're still not even like, Athens is not like a city yet. I mean, it's a city and there's people living there, but it's not Athens yet. So this is pre-Greece. I mean, this is 200 years before, Alexander the Great. So we're getting closer, but it's still a long time ago. And the Babylonians were really one of the first major empires. The Assyrians and then the Babylonians were really, really, again, it's not like the Egyptians weren't an empire. They were, but the Egyptians were pretty much concentrated. The Egyptians didn't really go much further than Israel. They went in, I mean, that's not exactly true. They went into Syria and to Turkey, but they didn't have territorial aspirations like the Assyrians and the Babylonians did. The Assyrians and the Babylonians were the first people that said, we're going to conquer as much territory as we can. The Egyptians don't seem as concerned with conquering territories. They definitely want to win wars, but they don't seem to say, hey, the more territory, like the better. They seem to be much more controlled with their territorial ambitions. The Assyrians and the Babylonians want to conquer everything, and there's no end to it. So the Persians take over, and the Greeks and the Romans and everyone after that wants to create the biggest empire possible. But it starts with the Assyrians and Babylonians. So here's what you're supposed to tell King Zedekiah.
But hear the word of God, O King Zedekiah of Judah. Thus said God concerning you, you will not die by the sword. You will die a peaceful death, and as incense was burned for your ancestors, the earlier kings who preceded you, so they will burn incense for you, and they will lament for you. Ah, Lord, for I myself have made the promise, declares God.
So Zedekiah is told, over and over again by Jeremiah, you're going to lose this war. But Jeremiah has now told him, well, you're going to die of old age. That's good.
And you'll be warned.
Yeah.
Rabbi, can you help me? I saw a picture of a Jewish king bowing down to an Assyrian on a black obelisk.
Yeah.
And to an Assyrian. So this is around this time period, right? But why is he
that's earlier, right? So the Assyrian, that's King Hezekiah. So that's, you're talking about, and the kings of Israel in the north. So that's 720. So that's about 130 years earlier. That's like 4 generations earlier. It's close, but that's a little bit earlier. But
Okay.
it's around the same time. I mean, it's close. But that was during the time of King Hezekiah. That's what we read about in the book of Kings. This is also in the book of Kings, but it's at the end of the book of Kings. These are literally the last chapters of the book of Kings we're reading right now. We're reading Jeremiah's take on it, which is pretty close to what we're reading Kings, because we believe that maybe Jeremiah wrote that too. So, or if not Jeremiah, but Baruch, yeah, one of his scribes, because it's virtually the same stuff.
Okay.
It's virtually the same stuff. There's no real differences. There's no differences in chronology. Book of Chronicles is different from this, but not the book of Kings. This is really close to what the book of Kings, exactly what the book of Kings says, except here's a little bit more details, because the book of Kings doesn't say Jeremiah told the king, hey, Zedekiah, at least you're going to die a natural death, which, well, we'll remind you later what actually happens to Zedekiah, but he doesn't get killed.
The prophet Jeremiah spoke all these words to King Zedekiah of Judah in Jerusalem, when the army of the king of Babylon was waging war against Jerusalem and against the remaining towns of Judah, against Lachish and Azekah, for they were the only fortified towns of Judah that were left.
Yeah, this is pretty much towards the end. Now, I've told you before, and we've discussed it, Jeremiah, the book, is not chronological. So we've actually read beyond this already to some extent. But where this is happening now, it's pretty close to the end. It's not the end, because Jerusalem hasn't been laid siege to yet. Or it's starting to, but it's not. There's being laid siege to, and then there's the actual breaching of, where they're going through the city. That hasn't happened yet, but it's pretty close. So this is like 587. So it's around that time.
The word that came to
Oh,
Jeremiah.
wait, by the way, I have a translation of Jeremiah where they actually lay it out chronologically. And so sometimes, chapter 24 comes right before this, and, and so at least it like lays it out, but it is not chronological. So, I mean, don't worry about the fact that it's like, well, we already read that it's even worse than that. Well, it's because it's not chronological. And Jeremiah, I don't have a great answer. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff about Jeremiah. I don't have a great answer for why it's laid out the way it is. I don't know that the people who've really studied it all their lives have a good answer for why it's laid out the way it is. So it's not like it makes sense because of the theme. It's not like it makes sense because it sets it up. It's difficult for people to, I haven't seen a good answer for it. I haven't seen a good answer. Yeah, it is the way it is, right? We know that it's been like this for a long time. We have it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's in the Septuagint. We know that this is the order, but I've not seen a good answer. Like I've never read a good answer for why it's the way it is, where it goes in and out of chronology. I mean, you're going to see it go out way out of chronology, but look, it's interesting because there's a reason for it. Well, there must be. I don't know that there's not a reason for it necessarily, other than like
Maybe it was compiled from different collections.
Yeah, but I don't
Didn't
like
wanna,
somebody, but
you know?
somebody put it that way, right? And was there a conscious decision for it? I will tell you this. It's interesting because the other book that was written by this group of people is the book of Deuteronomy that we're reading now on Wednesdays. And like, we're reading it now, and they're talking about one thing in Deuteronomy that happened right before they came into the land. And tomorrow night, we're going to read about Moses talking about what happened at Mount Sinai. It's totally not out of, there's like not even like I'm looking at it because I'm looking at what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I'm like, why is that there? Why we read about the 10 commandments, and now we're reading about him on Mount Sinai before he gets the 10 commandments. So Deuteronomy it's a stream of consciousness. I don't even know what to say. And Jeremiah is the same way. It's a stream of consciousness, but it's even stranger because there's prophecy in it, and then there's this narrative in it too. And so that's why whoever was responsible for these books, Jeremiah and his circle, chronology is not. I'm only saying this, by the way, too, because we're doing both together. And because I also just watched Oppenheimer, and Christopher Nolan refuses to tell a linear story. I mean, it's not, I mean, that's his thing. I mean, everybody knows that's his thing, but you have to remember, which story am I in right now? And is this the story of, I mean, go see Oppenheimer and you'll see, I mean, any Christopher Nolan movie, you have to remember which story they're telling. And he gives clues, for the people who go, well, that's shot in black and white and that's in color. And that's like, so people know kind of what to look for, but you have to watch his movies 2 or 3 times. It's the same thing with this. And I've read it dozens of times and I forget that things like were told in this way. It's a brilliant way of telling a story because it's the way our brains work. Our brains are jumping around all the time. So it's actually reflective, I think, of human consciousness more. That's why I say it's stream of consciousness, because I think it's human consciousness. But I don't understand it. I can't, all I can tell you is that Deuteronomy does it too. Lamentations does it. All the books that these guys are responsible for do it. And it's very Christopher Nolan. I can say that now too. But Christopher Nolan is very.
We're used to history being linear, but they weren't really into writing history. They were into telling a story.
Yeah, but I can't, like, that's true. I just don't know. I don't know why, but it still doesn't explain, like, thematically. I can get that. I can get that they're trying to, I don't understand. But again, the person had a reason for it or it came out that way and it just stuck. Anyways, like I said, it's also in my mind because I just saw that last week and I was like, oh, this is Deuteronomy. This is Jeremiah. This is the way people tell a story. And it really is brilliant. It's brilliant when it happens and when it works well, because you go, you know what? You don't have to tell a story linearly. You can let people have a story unfold as their brains work the same way. I don't know. All right, so let's, I'm only telling you this because when you see something and say, hey, we already read that, or that already happened, just know that's not the way Jeremiah presents it. All right.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God after King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to proclaim a release among them, that everyone should set free their Hebrew slaves, both male and female, and that no one should keep their fellow Judean enslaved. Everyone, officials and people who had entered into the covenant, agreed to set their male and female slaves free and not keep them enslaved any longer. They complied and let them go.
So when I talk about narrative being here, this is an important narrative. We don't have this in any other prophet. Jeremiah just told us something that we don't even have in the book of Kings, which is that as the siege was going on, the king ordered all slaves to be freed. That's huge. That's a huge moment when everyone is told they can't have slaves anymore. That must have been a huge social upheaval in the sense that, like, the rules of the society, the hierarchy just got pulled out.
It took 2,000 years.
Well, wait a second. It's not over.
But afterward, they turned about and brought back the men and women they had set free and forced them into slavery again.
Yeah, so it was short-lived. And you can imagine what kind of chaos that is. Well, you're all free. The king just said you're all free. Oh, you're not free anymore. We're going to round you all up and put you back into slavery. That's insane. So there's no question that whatever was happening, it's chaos. It's chaos. And the king did it, and then they undid it. We don't know. There's not really a reason given for why they went against it. What?
Perhaps Congress could work with it.
I mean, they're under siege. They're under siege.
This goes to human species. No, it goes deeper than business. It goes to ugliness of humanity and dominion over other people. This goes to the heart of, this goes to what I've been saying. That he created the human species and he just, how long between, because I've read just a little bit further, but I'm not going to say, how long from Exodus, from Pharaoh to this, how many years?
600 years.
Come on. I mean, so either he's dealing with other galaxies and he comes back and he goes, come on.
So people are now given freedom. Now, what it says is, it says he likro lachem dror, which is exactly what the book of Leviticus says. Kratem dror b'chol haaretz, b'chol asher yoshveha. That's Leviticus chapter 25:10. You know how I know that? Because it's on the Liberty Bell. Yeah. And the same words are used here. Likror lachem dror. That's why it says release or liberty, because we translate the word dror as liberty because it's on the Liberty Bell. We don't call it the release bell. We call it the Liberty Bell because the word dror is on there, is translated in the King James as liberty. But it's release. It's releasing slaves, which is what they're supposed to do according to the book of Leviticus. They're supposed to be freed in a Jubilee year. People are never supposed to be slaves indefinitely. So what it seems like is King Zedekiah finally did the right thing that had not been done, which is that he proclaimed liberty for all the people that were enslaved. So he did it, and then they undid it.
He didn't do it. He was ordered to do it, right? So his belief that Jeremiah was a prophet, right? Because God didn't show himself to Zedekiah, right? So it was the—
Yeah, but here's what it says.
It's like you telling me something, I truly believe you're speaking the word of God.
Okay, but there's a couple things.
I have dominion over others.
So there's a couple assumptions that the translation takes and that we take, that you took and everybody takes, which is that Zedekiah did this because God told him to do it. That's not what happens. What happened, the real translation of this is the word came to Jeremiah from God after King Zedekiah had done it. So King Zedekiah could have done it unilaterally, not that God told him to do it, that God's now told Jeremiah to talk to them after this has happened. Now, again, let's read what Jeremiah is now told to say. But King Zedekiah did it. And then it says, and then they went into this covenant and agreed to do it. And then it says they turned about and brought everyone back. It doesn't say that he did. It doesn't say Zedekiah told him to. It says they went about and did it. So it could have been the people, the slave owners who went back on the covenant. It's not that Zedekiah did it or that God told him to do, or even God told him to do it in the first place, but he could have done the right thing and then he undoes the right thing. That's a possibility. Or not even that he undoes the right thing. The people undid the right thing, the slave owners in the first place. But here's what it says that God said. This is, again.
Then it was that the word of God came to Jeremiah from God. Thus said the Eternal, the God of Israel, I made a covenant with your ancestors when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, saying, in the 7th year, each of you must let go any fellow Hebrew who may be sold to you. When they have served you 6 years, you must set them free. But your ancestors would not obey me or give ear. Lately, you turned about and did what is proper in my sight, and all of you proclaimed a release to your compatriots, and you made a covenant accordingly before me in the house that bears my name. But now you have turned back and have profaned my name. Each of you has brought back the men and women whom you had given their freedom and forced them to be your slaves again. Assuredly, thus said God, you would not obey me and proclaim a release, each to your kin and neighbor. Lo, I proclaim your release, declares God, to the sword, to pestilence, and to famine. And I will make you a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth.
Yeah, and there's that threefold thing: the sword, pestilence, pestilence, and famine.
question.
Yeah,
There's something about the 7th year is supposed to let your.
Yeah,
your,
slaves go.
crops just-
yeah, sabbatical
Where did
year.
it Go when they weren't needing them that much, the slaves.
Well, okay, so it's a land release and it's also a people release. Yeah, and this is the release from their debts. This is a release from their slavery. This is indentured servitude. So Jeremiah, God told Jeremiah. First of all, we don't know that God told Zedekiah to do the right thing, but Zedekiah did the right thing. Zedekiah did what his predecessors hadn't done, which is finally he got about doing this release. So it tells you that the system had been corrupted. They were not doing what they were supposed to be doing. They were keeping people in slavery forever. And Zedekiah did the right thing, and then the people undid it. Now, it doesn't say Zedekiah told them to undo it, but they undid it. And whatever, Zedekiah didn't stop them from undoing it. So they went against it. God was happy, and now God's not happy because they didn't do what they were supposed to do in the first place. So did God tell Zedekiah to do it? It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that Zedekiah was told by God, go do it and finally do it. He did what he was supposed to be doing all along, and every other king was supposed to be doing. He finally did it. So whatever, he did it. And then they undid it. And that makes God further upset at them. And then God says, you didn't do the release? Well, you'll have the release. Guess what? The book of Deuteronomy, which we're reading, and we're going to get to this in the book of Deuteronomy, it says it specifically. It says it in Leviticus too. God tells the people way back at Mount Sinai, way back as they're about to cross over, if you don't do the release the way I tell you to, if you don't give a sabbatical for the earth, if you don't release the people, I will wipe you out. I will wipe out everything on the land, and the land will get the release it needs, because you won't be there to farm it. No one will be there to farm it, and the land will get a break. They'll get a sabbatical because you won't be there. And that's what Jeremiah just said again. That's what God has told him again. You're not going to do it. You'll be released. I'm going to release everything bad on you. But again, the consequence is the land will get what it needs. The people will be free, or they at least won't be your slaves anymore. They'll be slaves somewhere else, but they won't be your slave. So here's what it says.
I will make the parties who violated my covenant, who did not fulfill the terms of the covenant that they made before me, like the calf that they cut in two so as to pass between the halves. The officers of Judah and Jerusalem, the officials, the priests, and all the people of the land who passed between the halves of the calf shall be handed over to their enemies, to those who seek to kill them. Their carcasses shall become food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth.
Yeah, that's pretty much the worst thing you could have. And you can see that the covenant or the sacrifice of halves is something that Abraham does. He splits an animal in two and then walks between it. So it seems as though that covenant sacrifice is something that was either reenacted occasionally, or again, he's invoking, but it's probably because it was redone. And here's what happens to your leaders.
I will hand over King Zedekiah of Judah and his officers to their enemies who seek to kill them, to the army of the king of Babylon that has withdrawn from you. I hereby give the command, declares God, by which I will bring them back against this city. They shall attack it and capture it and burn it down. I will make the towns of Judah a desolation without inhabitant.
All right, before you go into that, I just want to tell you, what did this just say? That the Babylonians had withdrawn from the siege. That's what it just said. So there was a time when the siege, or at least the impending destruction of Jerusalem, had been averted. Now, if that's what's happening, then it makes sense that people are saying, oh, maybe this war is not going to end badly. Well, he just told them it is going to end badly. You're all going to be captured. Some of you are going to be wiped out, and Jerusalem's going to be burned down. So you think that there's a respite from this? It's temporary. It will happen. I will tell you, that's why, like, in our minds, Nebuchadnezzar marches against Jerusalem. He destroys it. and that's it. That's not what happened. The Babylonian armies invade, they threaten the people, they behave for a while. Nebuchadnezzar takes one of the kings away, takes him in exile. You know, remember Jehoiakim, he takes him in exile, puts a new king on power. That king doesn't work. They put another king. One of the kings runs away to Egypt. They go down and capture. I mean, this is not like overnight destruction. This goes on for a while. This goes on for years, actually. And it's not just a siege. It's not like they just went to war. They eventually surrounded them and destroyed it. That's not what happens. And we forget that because, like, in our minds, it must have been pretty straightforward, and it must have been a war that, you know, they ended, and it was bad, and it was bad, and then it was good, and then it was bad again, and then it got worse, and then it got better, and then it got bad. I mean, it was constantly like the cycle of violence and coming out for a second and then getting bad again. It was like that. It was not just like an overnight destruction. And again, we forget because, like, in our minds, we see a movie and that's the way it is. I mean, it wasn't like that. When you think about, you know, World War II, you know, the fact that, you know, Poland was under occupation for 6 years. The Nazis, you know, were 6 years in Poland, and, you know, it must have been just a nightmare. I mean, for the Jews, it was constantly a nightmare, but, you know, for the average Polish citizen, it must have been a nightmare. And it wasn't an overnight thing. It was 6 years, from 1939 to 1945. I mean, that's just one country. I mean, I'm not picking on one country, but, you know, you can imagine in our minds, it's just like, well, it was over, and, you know, it wasn't over. It was a nightmare for years. And that's kind of what happens to Jerusalem. And people constantly are going, well, maybe it's over. Maybe the siege is over. Maybe the Babylonians are done. And that's not what happened. It happened with the Assyrians too, by the way. That's the reason why, like, the Babylonians, maybe the Babylonians will be like the Assyrians. The Assyrians ended up going home and they didn't conquer Jerusalem. Remember, Hezekiah held out. He was able to survive. So how would the Jews during this time, how would they think it's any different? Maybe God will send us plague against the Assyrians and they'll go home, or there'll be a revolution, a coup back in Nineveh. There'll be a coup now back in Babylon, and they'll go back. You can understand why because, like, the constant, like, well, it's going to be good, it's going to be bad. How do you wake up and not know, like, what's going to happen? The psychological trauma on these people must have been amazing. John, what were you were going to say something?
Backtrack 600 years into Exodus.
Yeah.
Can you give me an area where God said it's okay to have slaves for 7 years? I'm having a hard time.
So
I know we read through it.
so here's it's in Leviticus, right? So Leviticus doesn't say you can have slaves. Leviticus says that your slaves are released after 7 years, right? So if you think about it this way, it doesn't say the Torah never says go have slaves. The Torah says if you have slaves, this is the way you have to treat them. So the Torah in the Exodus says, in the 10 Commandments, your slaves get Shabbat off. It says so. So, you know, like, where does it say? It doesn't say, you know, here, I'll show you here's the line. I'll just show you the line from Leviticus. So it says, here's the line for that's on the Liberty Bell. You shall proclaim release, right? It says right here, Ukratem dror ba'aretz l'kol yoshveha. You shall proclaim release throughout the land, which again, it's going to say proclaim liberty somewhere. I would think it would be here, but anyways, and each of you shall return to your holding, and each to your family. So it's talks about, let me just show you. This is all about the land. Let me just show you one about them being slaves. This is all property. This is not charging them interest. Here. If your kin under your continuance straits and must be given over to you, do not subject them to a treatment of a slave. Remaining with you as a hired or bound laborer, they shall serve with you only until the Jubilee year. Right? For they are my servants whom I freed from the land of Egypt, right? They're not your people, are not your, such male and females as you may have. It is from the nations around you that you may acquire male and female slaves, right? Yeah. So it doesn't say you're allowed to put your.
I just, I don't want to get so.
No, but that's,
Really?
but so that's, well,
Not
That-
Jewish thing, though.
Human beings.
so there are two categories of slaves. We call Canaanite slaves and Hebrew slaves. So Hebrew slaves are not allowed to be kept indefinitely. Are Canaanite slaves allowed to be? Yes. Now, not to, somebody's gonna say I excuse slavery. Here's what the biblical justification for it was. If you went to war against the people and didn't want them to rebel against you again, you made them your slave. You brought them home as your slave, so you didn't have to kill them. But that was the argument, was that slavery was better than wiping them out. But that's one of the justifications for it, was that they didn't have a way of subduing people in those days, and especially the Israelites, other than by making them their slaves. I don't know. The other argument is that everybody did it. So
Descendants, right? All the descendants.
Yeah.
Adam, Eve, Noah, right?
Yeah.
All the descendants of the children of God.
Yeah.
Right? We're all. And some were Israelites, some were not. All I'm saying is like, who's never decided that one can slave one? Moving on.
well,
Let's
wait a
move on
second,
now.
John. What's your favorite text? What do you keep going back to? No. What's your favorite text?
I just find it hilarious.
No, but what you have.
all are over here.
No,
I go
no,
back
but
skip forward just to keep
No,
current.
no, you have a favorite text. Your favorite text is Noah. You love Noah, right?
Well, I am trying to.
No, you love, I'm just gonna show you Noah, just for quick time.
Yes.
Here's the line. Noah, we talk about this all the time.
Listen, I'm
Noah
not
woke
making
up from his
this
wine and learned what his
line.
youngest son had done to him, and he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves shall he be to his brothers."
Wait, scroll up. Scroll up. Noah woke up. It's Noah said it, not God.
I understand, but this is the justification.
Noah was pissed off because you.
Blessed be Adonai, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them. Okay, so you're right. It doesn't say God said it, but Noah said it, and God never says to Noah, you don't have permission to do that. This is the biblical justification for slaves. This is,
the verses he was working
I
on.
understand, but this is what Noah does. It's a curse. So it's Noah's curse.
Implying God condoned it. That's a big stretch.
All I can tell you is there was ministers and
He can't stop humans from doing anything.
John, there were ministers in Tennessee and Georgia that were quoting this line in 1860
You know what?
to still justify slaves in America.
By now, humans are out of control, right?
Yeah.
That's why the floods came. God can, so Reverend.
This is
let's
after-
say
this is
something.
after
I think
This is after the flood, right?
He couldn't control the human species.
But this is after the flood.
I understand, but.
So but this is the justification for it, right? Canaanites are slaves. That's why we call them Canaanite slaves.
That's a
And it wasn't just Canaanites, right? Anybody who was non-Israelite was called a Canaanite slave. So the Canaanite slave category continues into the Talmud. Why? Because slavery continued into the Talmud, and it continued into 1850, 1860 in America. So almost every country, well, actually continued on and still continues on.
It's out of control. I guarantee you that's.
All right, but it's a justification that people used for a system that they couldn't get rid of. Yeah.
reading a fascinating book about the Cherokee who had black slaves.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, fascinating. Wow.
I get to bet you they didn't read the
Refer to
Bible.
Torah.
They didn't have to. Every culture did. Native Americans had slaves. That's the point. They would conquer another tribe and they'd make them their slaves. I mean, everybody did it. I'm not saying it was right. You're right. Humans, we had to come up with a system that eventually stopped that. But John, is there any doubt that if civilization, if
Still
if
something
if-
going on in one form or
correct,
We
but
have
if
their-
if our country descended into the apocalyptic nightmare that everybody thinks it could be, you don't think there wouldn't be slaves again? Of course there would be.
That's my point. We're talking.
No, it is your point. People do horrible stuff.
Talk about the Torah
Yeah.
and God.
Slaves in America now. Not legally, but there are.
Because human beings will do it. You're right. That's the point. You're right. So human beings will be doing this. Does the Bible allow it? Yeah, the Bible allows it. Does the Bible
Do
condone it?
animals have slaves?
I don't know.
No.
They don't see it. They don't see it as slaves. I don't know.
Well, male lions sit around and wait. for the-
Yeah, exactly.
And I witnessed that.
I kind of wish that would happen. But anyways, no, that's what people,
You mentioned something here in Jeremiah. I needed some.
well, you
precedent.
saw
You're
it.
giving me implied
You-
precedent, and
It's not implied.
It's
It-
implied.
people had slaves. And did they need a justification for why they had slaves? I don't think they needed it. They just assumed it. They just assumed it. They always assumed it. Well, let's read a little bit because this, I just want you to see, is how it goes backwards completely. Look at this one right here. Look at this is chapter 35. We'll just read a little bit here. Okay.
The word that came to Jeremiah from God in the days of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah. Go to the house of the Rechabites and speak to them and bring them to the house of God to one of the chambers and give them wine to drink.
So this is before Zedekiah was king. And this happened during the time of King Jehoiakim, who we talked about was one of Josiah's other sons. So Josiah had 3 sons that were king and 1 grandson who was king during this very crazy times. The Rechabites. Let's see who the Rechabites are. Who are the Rechabites? You will see.
So I took Yaazaniah, the son of Jeremiah, son of Habazziniah, and his brothers, all his sons, and all the men in the household of the Rechabites, and I brought them to the house of God, to the chamber of the sons of Hanan, son of Igdaliah, the agent of God, which is next to the chamber of the officials and above the chamber of Maaseiah, son of Shallum, the guardian of the threshold.
Very detailed, right? This is very clearly happening. Like he's describing this as it's happening. Yep, it's happening, right? So this is what he's doing. Here's what he's going to do to the Rechabites.
They replied, "We will not drink wine, for our ancestor Yonadav, son of Rechab, commanded us, you shall never drink wine, either you or your children."
Yeah, they have some law, family tradition that they don't drink alcohol.
"Nor shall you build houses or sow fields or plant vineyards, nor shall you own such things, but you shall live in tents all your days, so that you may live long upon the land where you sojourn. And we have obeyed our ancestor Yonadav, son of Rechab, in all that he commanded us. We never drink wine, neither we nor our wives nor our sons and daughters. Nor do we build houses to live in, and we do not own vineyards or fields for sowing, but we live in tents. We have obeyed and done all that our ancestor Yonadav commanded us."
So these are not like well, they're like Nazarites, but they're not Nazarites. They're not willingly taking on a vow of not drinking alcohol for some reason. These are people that are raised in a tradition of not drinking alcohol. And not only that, they live in tents. They live like
Bedouin.
like Bedouin or some kind of like group, and they're very true to their tradition. It was a family tradition. It went on and on for generations. They don't drink alcohol. They don't do it. very much like some of the people in this country. What do we call those people?
Amish.
Well, before they were religious ones. You see this picture? The Independent Order of Rechabites,
Oh,
temperance-friendly society, truth and temperance, love and purity. So you can still see the Rechabites were a symbol. They were a inspiration for the temperance societies in the United States.
what is she giving that baby to drink?
I know it's well, I guess it's not alcohol. Truth and temperance, love and purity, right? So this is a founded, this Independent Order of Rechabites was founded in 1835. So this is these were, they look what they call themselves, tents, right? Tents were founded for adult females over these. See, these were tents. That's where they use the word tent. And it says again, they would learn from scriptures, the son of Yonadab. So they would, that's what they use as their inspiration. So Jeremiah is using them as another reason. He's teaching a lesson through these people. So go get the Rechabites, go see if they'll drink alcohol. No, it says they won't.
But when King Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon invaded the country, we said, "Come, let us go into Jerusalem because of the army of the Chaldeans and the army of Aram." And so we are living in Jerusalem.
So yeah, we don't normally live in cities, but there's a war going on. So we came in and lived in the city. And of course, it says that it's not just the Babylonians that are here. The children of Aram, the Arameans are here, the Syrians are here. So they're also part of the invading army. So again, it shows us that other armies are taking part, and in some cases they're being named. So they're living here now, but we don't normally live here. So here's what it says.
Then the word of God came to Jeremiah. Thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, go say to the citizenry of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, you can learn a lesson here about obeying my commands, declares God. The commands of Yonadav, son of Rechab, have been fulfilled. He charged his children not to drink wine, and to this day they have not drunk, in obedience to the charge of their ancestor. But I spoke to you persistently, and you did not listen to me. I persistently sent you all my servants, the prophets, to say, turn back, every one of you, from your wicked ways, and mend your deeds. Do not follow other gods or serve them. Then you may remain on the land that I gave to you and your ancestors. But you did not give ear or listen to me. The family of Yonadav, son of, don't scroll so fast. The family of Yonadav, son of Rechab, have indeed fulfilled the charge that their ancestor gave them. But this people has not listened to me. Assuredly, thus said the Eternal, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, I am going to bring upon Judah and upon all the inhabitants of Jerusalem all the disaster with which I have threatened them. For I spoke to them, but they would not listen. I called to them, but they would not respond. And to the family of the Rechabites, Jeremiah said, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, because you have obeyed the charge of your ancestor Yonadav and kept all his commandments and done all that he enjoined upon you, assuredly, thus said God of hosts, the God of Israel, there shall never cease to be someone from the line of Yonadav, son of Rechab, standing before me.
Except for the fact that we don't know what happened to them. We don't know what happened to the Rechabites. I mean, there are people who thousands of years later claim to be Rechabites, but we don't really know what happened to them. They seem to have been a nomadic subgroup of Jews who continue to follow in their ways, but we don't know what happened to them. I mean, there's traditions that, of course, if God is saying that they're not going to go away, that they still have a lineage, but we really don't know about them. And they don't really figure into Jewish tradition because there's no real explanation for why they did what they did. It's just that God's saying, look, these people can listen to their ancestor. You can't listen to me. I've been telling you this stuff for thousands of years and you can't listen to me. Yet they listen to their great-great-grandfather who told them not to drink wine and to live in tents, and they're still doing it. So God's saying to people, look, you're capable. People are capable of listening. You just don't want to listen to me. You're not listening to God. So, there's this kind of implication that that people can listen to another person, but they can't listen to me. So, again, the Rechabites are kind of held up as a model for people who can follow direction and do the right thing. But again, giving up wine was not considered to be like a normal behavior. It's not like something that they're saying, well, wouldn't it be great if you gave up wine? And to some extent, it's not like Jewish tradition doesn't want people to do those kind of things. It's not considered to be you're not, there's nobody expecting it to you. And that's why the Nazirite laws were kind of like pushed to the side, because people didn't want that. They didn't want to do that. And they didn't want them to give up. They didn't want them to become ascetic, and they didn't want them to become monks. The rabbis really didn't want people to do that, and kind of like frowned on people who engaged in those kind of behaviors. So they didn't want people to willingly give up these things. Look, I get in arguments all the time with non-vegetarian people, rabbis, who say, you're not supposed to give up meat. God gave it to us to enjoy, and you're not enjoying it. I mean, they don't say it seriously to me like you're doing something bad, but they're like, you don't have a right to do that. So I don't know. I mean, I did it because I only enjoyed it, but I didn't. Anyways, there is a strain of Orthodox Judaism that says you're not supposed to do that. You don't have a right to give up things that God told you to enjoy. So that's why teetotaling is not. It's not that it's frowned upon in Judaism, because you're not supposed to drink in excess, but you're definitely not. It's not like something to be encouraged. And if people have an issue, an addiction, they're definitely not supposed to be encouraged to drink. But it was not seen as like good behavior to tell people to give up stuff that they normally shouldn't give up. They should be able to control their impulses, but they're not supposed to give up these things. So we'll complete our studies for today there. But well, actually, you know what? This one's not. I want you to read just this little bit here, Rosemary. Let's just read a little bit of chapter 36. This is a really famous part, and we're here. So let's read a little bit more. Just read a little bit more.
In the 4th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from God. Get a scroll and write upon it all the words that I have spoken to you concerning Israel and Judah and all the nations, from the time I first spoke to you in the days of Josiah to this day. Perhaps when the house of Judah hear of all the disasters I intend to bring upon them, they will turn back from their wicked ways, and I will pardon their iniquity and their sin.
Folks, chapter 36 seems to be the beginning of Jeremiah's career. This actually seems to be when, and some people have pointed it out, that this is where Jeremiah starts his job. Why? Because there seems to be this approach here that you're going to write it down. I'm going to tell you what to say. We write it down, and maybe they'll listen to you. Which seems to imply that God doesn't know that they won't listen to him. Well, it does. I mean, it says maybe they'll, get a scroll, and ulai, maybe they'll hear. And by the way, that's the word we use all the time in Deuteronomy. Shema. Yishmeu. They'll hear. They'll listen. They'll pay attention and turn back. This is to some extent, Jeremiah being called into duty. And here's what it says he does. Because it says, write it down, right? It says, don't just, I'm not just going to tell it to you and you speak to the people. You're going to write it down. And look what he does.
So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote down in the scroll at Jeremiah's dictation all the words that God had spoken to him. Jeremiah instructed Baruch, I am in hiding. I cannot go to the house of God, but you go and read aloud God's words from the scroll that you wrote at my dictation to all the people in the house of God on a fast day. Thus you will also be reading them to all the Judeans who come in from the towns. Perhaps their entreaty will be accepted by God if they turn back from their wicked ways. For great is the anger and wrath with which God has threatened this people.
Yeah, so Baruch, you go tell it to him. I can't come out. I'm not going to come out of hiding. Now, it doesn't really say why he's in hiding now, but maybe they'll listen to you, Baruch. And this is again read what happens.
Baruch, son of Neriah, did just as the prophet Jeremiah had instructed him about reading God's words from the scroll in the house of God. In the 9th month of the 5th year of King Jehoiakim, son of Josiah of Judah, all the people in Jerusalem and all the people coming from Judah proclaimed a fast before God in Jerusalem. It was then that Baruch, in the chamber of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, the scribe, in the upper court near the new gateway of the house of God, read the words of Jeremiah from the scroll to all the people in the house of God. Micaiah, son of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, heard all the words of God read from the scroll, and he went down to the king's palace, to the chamber of the scribe. There he found all the officials in session: Elishama the scribe, Delaiah, son of Shemaiah, Elnatan, son of Achbor, Gemariah, son of Shaphan, Zedekiah, son of Hananiah, and all the other officials.
So this seems like it really happened, in the sense that this doesn't seem like a dream. This seems like it really happened. Everybody who heard, or again, the word as it's spreading through court, and you can see who's in charge, right? The scribes, the different people who are the officials. And you can see this guy, Shaphan, is a part of this. Jeremiah is told Baruch to read from the scroll. This is very similar to what happens when King Josiah finds the book of Deuteronomy and reads the scroll out to everybody else. This seems to be a thing that these people do. And that only happened 20 years before, 15 years before. Reading a scroll to people and hoping that they'll listen. This is a famous scene of what happened.
And Micaiah told them all that he had heard as Baruch read from the scroll in the hearing of the people. Then all the officials sent Yehudi, son of Netaniah, son of Shelemiah, son of Cushi, to say to Baruch, "Take that scroll from which you read to the people and come along." And Baruch took the scroll and came to them. They said, "Sit down and read it to us." And Baruch read it to them. When they heard all these words, they turned to each other in fear, and they said to Baruch, "We must report all this to the king."
Yeah. They're freaked out by it. And
This is the first public education.
I don't know if it's the first public education, but it's definitely one of the first documented scenes of somebody shaking up the court. It's definitely the first one that we've read where a guy wrote it down.
It's not enough for Jeremiah to say it. but
Yeah.
when it's
Written down.
it's much more interesting.
Yeah. And now people are like, this is like a Bible. This is it. Well, read what he says.
And they questioned Baruch further. "Tell us how you wrote down all these words that he spoke." He answered them, "He himself recited all those words to me, and I would write them down in the scroll in ink." The officials said to Baruch, "Go into hiding, you and Jeremiah. Don't let a soul know where you are." And they went to the king in the court after leaving the scroll in the chamber of the scribe Elishama, and they reported all these matters to the king. The king sent Yehudi to get the scroll, and he fetched it from the chamber of the scribe Elishama. Yehudi read it to the king and to all the officials who were in attendance on the king. Since it was the 9th month, the king was sitting in the winter house with a fire burning in the brazier before him.
Yeah. So
And every time Yehudi read 3 or 4
time.
columns, the king would cut it up with a scribe's knife and throw it into the fire in the brazier until the entire scroll was consumed by the fire in the brazier. Yet the king and all his courtiers who heard all these words showed no fear and did not tear their garments. Moreover, Elnatan, Delaiah, and Gemariah begged the king not to burn the scroll. but he would not listen to them. The king ordered Jeremiel, the king's son, and Seraiah, son of Azriel, and Shelemiah, son of Abdiel, to arrest the scribe Baruch and the prophet Jeremiah. But God hid them. The word of God came to Jeremiah after the king had burned the scroll containing the words that Baruch had written at Jeremiah's dictation. Get yourself another scroll and write upon it the same words that were in the first scroll that was burned by King Jehoiakim of Judah. And concerning King Jehoiakim of Judah, you shall say, thus said God, you burned that scroll, saying, how dare you write in it that the king of Babylon will come and destroy this land and cause human and animal to cease from it. Assuredly, thus said God concerning King Jehoiakim of Judah, he shall not have any of his line sitting on the throne of David, and his own corpse shall be left exposed to the heat by day and the cold by night. And I will punish him and his offspring and his courtiers for their iniquity. I will bring on them and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem and on all the citizenry of Judah all the disasters of which I have warned them, but they would not listen.
So this goes south very quick. And Jeremiah essentially knows, and again, we'll pick it up next week. Well, actually, let's read. We're almost done. So it's one more line.
So Jeremiah got another scroll and gave it to the scribe Baruch, son of Neriah. And at Jeremiah's dictation, he wrote in it the whole text of the scroll that King Jehoiakim of Judah had burned, and more of the like was added.
So
He did it in hiding.
yeah. So this is what it tells us about Jeremiah in chapter 36. And again, we're almost done, or 15 more chapters. We're done with Jeremiah. In the 36th chapter, it basically told us how he got started. Now, I want to tell you, that's from King Jehoiakim's time. Look at the next line.
Zedekiah, son of Josiah, became king instead of Coniah, son of Jehoiakim, for King Nebuchadrezzar of Babylon set him up as king over the land of Judah.
That's chapter 37. That's not even close. There's another king in between them, Jeconiah, or sometimes called Coniah. There's Jehoiakim, then there's Coniah, and then there's Zedekiah. So the next chapter is completely out of whack. Why is chapter 36 there? Why isn't it at the beginning of the book? It's insane. It's like literally Jeremiah just had a flashback, or whoever decided to put it in the order that it did. Hey, and by the way, this is the way it all started. Chapter 36, if you look it up, I mean, most people who look at chapter 36, they say this is where Jeremiah essentially, does his first thing. And what is it? He causes the king of Judah, Jehoiakim, so much craziness that he burns the scroll, which only sends a message to the rest of the people that Jeremiah must be speaking on behalf of God. Because why else would the king be so scared? Why would it create such craziness other than Jeremiah is the real deal? And this is where Jeremiah starts to live in fear. So next week, we'll be in person again, and we'll continue on. We're going to get into a part of Jeremiah, not next week, but the week after, where Jeremiah starts to talk about these other kingdoms. He starts in about chapter 40, where he starts to talk about these other kingdoms. But yeah, I mean, this is Jeremiah giving you a little bit of what happens with his job, like what his life was like. So yeah, that's we have details in this that are very, very clear, and they're very very detailed. I mean, very detailed. So it's very hard to think that like this didn't happen, because the details of it are very, very clear. Thank you, Rosemary, for reading for us. Wish you a good rest of the week, everybody. Join us for tomorrow night as we read Deuteronomy, my Torah portion that I read for my bar mitzvah. And I'm going to chant it. I'm not going to chant it, actually. It's re'eh. Part of it's re'eh. So, all right, everybody, take care. We'll see you soon.
Everybody.
Get your tickets for Golda before they sell out again. Or actually, let's sell out another theater. Bye-bye.